I can see it. I can see where we were sitting. I could see the Holocaust survivor where he was speaking. I was about 6, and this survivor was telling a story about being 4 years old. He'd been in hiding, but he was discovered. And at that point, it was emaciated. And a Nazi soldier walked in and pulled a gun and held it to this little boy's head. And then a second soldier came in and said, "Don't waste the bullet, he'll be dead anyway." And the two of them left. And he somehow managed to survive. And since I was only 6 when I heard that, I remembered what it was like to be 4. And I couldn't imagine that kind of a world. That started me on a path of trying to figure out how something like that could happen. My name is Liz Helitzer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine. The organization was founded in 1985, but the seeds behind the birth of the organization began in the 70s. Gerda Haas is a Holocaust survivor originally from Germany. She moved to the Lewiston-Auburn area in the early 50s, and in the 70s she was asked to join the State School Board of Education. And while on that board, she learned that the Holocaust was not being taught in schools. At that point, Gerda had not shared her story with her children, and so there was this combined realization that students attending school in Maine weren't learning about the Holocaust. Her own children weren't learning about this significant piece of their history. So Gerda began going around and telling her stories at schools and libraries. And from there, slowly the seeds were planted for the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine. In 2008, doors opened to the Michael Clark Center. We're reaching about 4,000 students a year throughout the state. We currently offer 6 workshops. They're all interactive. We think it's effective to engage in a conversation with students than to just stand there and lecture at them. We use this teaching tool called the Pyramid of Hate. And the Pyramid of Hate was developed by social scientists and historians who have studied genocide and noticed that there's this pattern. First, people have prejudiced attitudes. So they don't challenge belittling jokes, or they blame a group of people, scapegoating. Next, there are acts of prejudice, things like name-calling, social avoidance, social exclusion. And then from there, it goes into discrimination, violence, and genocide. Those first 2 steps, acts of prejudice, prejudice attitudes, those are things that most of us are guilty of doing at some point. Kids in particular, in the school environment where bullying is still an issue, are very aware of things like name-calling, social avoidance, social exclusion. And so we point out to them, if we work together to eliminate those first 2 steps, you can't get to the other 3. It doesn't generally leap from prejudiced attitudes to genocide. It's got to build. Two of the workshops we present, focused on the lessons of the Holocaust, are called The Message Matters and Decision Making in Times of Injustice. The Message Matters is about propaganda and messaging in Nazi Germany and the propaganda and messaging that happens here in the United States from the 1950s to present day. Decision Making in Times of Injustice focuses on the steps leading up to the Holocaust. Another workshop we present is Civil Rights in America, Yesterday and Today. We focus on the effectiveness of protesting nonviolently, the power of the individual, and the importance of learning to disagree without being disagreeable. There are basic civil rights today that are not afforded to everyone and may require us to speak up. The civil rights movement of the 60s teaches us that you can do that nonviolently and make incredible progress. And so after we've talked with students about the Holocaust or the civil rights movement, and then saying, so we've talked about these pretty challenging times in history, and we've talked about something that's on each of these levels in the pyramid of hate. And then we say, well, here's what you can do. Here's how you can actively prevent genocides from occurring. We got a note in the mail from one of the students that said she learned that one person can make a difference. Our workshops are designed to remind all of us that our actions, how I treat other people, it matters. That seems to hit home. That seems to register with them. And seeing that connection made gives us hope. We would love to think that genocide will never exist one day. History shows us that this idea of us versus them is a timeless one. But that doesn't mean that we should give up and that you just give in to the fact that a lot of people are going to want to live in an us versus them world. There has to be someone on the other side championing inclusion and kindness and respect. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that this organization exists.